Well, thank you for joining us this evening. This is the third of a series of floodway fringe overlay informational meetings for our residents. And my name's Vernon Girth. I'm Assistant City Administrator with the City of Franklin. And again, I welcome you all for coming. We do have several aldermen present this evening. Alderman Ann Peterson, Alderman Margaret Martin, Brandy Blanton, and Mike Skinner, as well as our Mayor Ken Moore. And we also have staff available, Shannon McCoy, Molly Pike, our Planning and Sustainability Department Director, Catherine Powers, and Kelly Dannensfeller, who will be making a presentation here shortly to provide you with an overview of the floodway fringe overlay and the impact it has on hopefully your properties, and that's why you've come to join us this evening. Kelly will lead us through this somewhat complex topic.
Good evening, everyone. In January, staff held a public meeting with the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Planning Commission to bring some floodplain zoning matters to their attention. Specifically, the historic Old Jail on Bridge Street is unusable because it's been vacant so long, and the land use restrictions for non-residential properties in the floodplain. One of the outcomes of that meeting was to schedule some meetings with the non-residential property owners to explain the zoning impacts of the floodway fringe overlay, or FFO. The FFO is an overlay zoning district that mirrors the 100-year floodplain, and it's shown in light blue on this map. We also have an FWO, floodway overlay, shown in dark blue, which covers the area where water is flowing or moving during a 100-year flood. In contrast, the FFO is where the water is stored or is held during a 100-year flood. The 100-year floodplain is the 1% chance of flooding each year and the 26% chance of flooding over a 30-year time frame. You may be here tonight because you received a notice from the city that your property intersects with the FFO, and it may barely touch the property, with the example shown to the left, or completely cover the parcel, the right example, depending on where the 100-year floodplain boundary is. The second part is that your property is non-residentially zoned. We use mapping software to identify these parcels that were both non-residential and touching the FFO. First, I'll go over some background information, starting with the reasons for floodplain regulations. First and foremost, to protect human life, health, safety, and property, minimize rescue and relief efforts generally undertaken at the expense of the general public, minimize prolonged business interruptions, and maintain eligibility for property owners for participation in the National Flood Insurance Program to obtain flood insurance. Next, Franklin's floodplain history. In 1991, the zoning ordinance prohibited new buildable lots in Franklin, but exempted those that pre-existed 1991. The 2004 land use plan identified conservation areas contemplating as little development as possible in floodplain areas. And in 2008, the comprehensive zoning ordinance update established the FFO and the FWO to implement the land use plan recommendations. And at that time, it also removed the pre-existing lot exemption. The FFO allows limited new uses and encroachments: passive parks, golf courses and open space, active recreation features, temporary uses like construction trailers, construction dumpsters, modular classrooms, tents, that sort of thing, public and private infrastructure, floodplain alteration, and pervious parking lots. The FFO sits on top of the base zoning district, which sits on top of the parcel of land. And if the FFO and the base zoning district conflict, the FFO wins or prevails in that case. And in this case, it does in terms of permitted uses. This means that existing uses that were previously allowed by the base zoning district are now legally non-conforming in the FFO. And legally non-conforming means that the use or the structure went in according to the rules at the time. Over time, the rules changed, and now the use or structure doesn't meet today's standards. Residential nonconformities may continue in perpetuity, regardless of whether or not they're vacant, how long they're vacant, and they can expand, repair, and rebuild, according to section 5.8.5, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Industrial, commercial, or other business nonconformities can also continue to operate indefinitely. However, no change of use is allowed. Vacant buildings may be reoccupied with the same use type as long as it's reoccupied within 30 months of abandonment, and our ordinance follows Tennessee's pre-existing nonconforming use law, as you see there. I'm going to cover that again because that's really one of the main reasons we're here tonight. If a building is or becomes vacant, the building may be reoccupied with the same use type previously there within a 30-month window. Now, some of the use types are really broad, like retail and commercial uses and personal services that are shown in the purple arrows on our use table, while others are more specific, like convenience stores or vehicle sales and rental. And that's because there's specific standards associated with those use types in the zoning ordinance. The Building and Neighborhood Services Department, formerly Codes Department, uses this table to identify the use types that are permitted for certain parcels to continue to maintain their legally non-conforming status. Legally non-conforming uses have the ability to continue operating, undertake minor repairs or perform routine maintenance, add additional facilities, expand existing building footprints, and tear down and reconstruct all or part of the nonconformity. What they may not do is add additional land to the nonconformity. The city recently adopted zoning ordinance section 5.8.5, which provides standards for new construction, expansion, and substantial improvement for existing buildings in the FFO. And any development or redevelopment activities requires a floodplain development permit through the Building and Neighborhood Services Department. Section 5.8.5 for non-residential states that new construction, expansion, or substantial improvement, which is equal to 50% or more of the appraised value of a building, shall have the lowest floor elevated or floodproof to no lower than 1 foot above the 100-year flood elevation. So in the diagram, you can see the 100-year floodplain blue arrow, and then the bottom of the first floor of the building is 1 foot above that. If a use is abandoned or discontinued for a continuous period of 30 months or more, it will lose its nonconforming status. So after that time, the only uses permitted would be FFO uses: parks, open space, golf courses, active recreation, temporary uses, etc. It can no longer be the previous use and cannot be expanded or rebuilt. The May 2010 flood caused some vacancies in non-residential buildings along the Fifth Avenue North corridor. If a building has been vacant since that time, since the flood, it would need to be reoccupied by November 2012 to maintain its legally non-conforming status. Switching gears to undeveloped vacant parcels with no buildings and no uses. No new buildings or base district uses are allowed within the FFO boundaries. So once again, Which district applies depends on where the FFO or 100-year floodplain boundary is. So if the FFO is just touching the parcel, like the example on the left, most of the property adheres to the base district rules. In the middle example, half of the property is in the FFO, half is out, so each half adheres to the FFO and base district. But if it's all in the FFO, then the FFO covers the entire parcel in terms of permitted uses. Cut and fill may be permitted to shift the 100-year floodplain boundary in accordance with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. It's a very thorough process, so this is an overly simplified Cliff Notes version of the general rules. Big disclaimer there. But if you take 3 truckloads of dirt and dump it in the floodplain somewhere, you have to remove 3 truckloads of dirt from the floodplain on or adjacent to the property, so somewhere right around there. It cannot adversely impact adjacent properties without their consent, and no alterations in the floodway are permitted without proving there are no negative impacts. There may be positive impacts, but not negative ones. And for properties that are undeveloped that have previously approved concept plans on them prior to the effective date of the zoning ordinance update, they met the old standards which still apply today, that no new buildable lots are located in the floodplain. In some cases, cut and fill is planned to accomplish that. And the FFO is intended to coincide with the 100-year floodplain. So when cut and fill is approved that alters the boundary, according to FEMA, the FFO will be revised to match. So some things we wanted to accomplish tonight were to communicate with property owners that may be impacted, explain the zoning impacts, and get out in front of the potentially upcoming legally non-conforming time frame from the 2010 flood, and answer questions from property owners. Now, since this is the 3rd meeting that we've had, we've sort of compiled a few questions that seem to run through. So I'll go over those, and then we can move to an open question answer forum. Who establishes the 100-year floodplain boundaries? FEMA does that. Have the 100-year floodplain lines been redrawn due to the 2010 flood? Not at this time. FEMA establishes a review and revision cycle for floodplain lines that aren't necessarily based on floods. When they have been updated, the city will be notified of those changes. Who determines whether a property has substantial damage and what is considered substantial? The Department of Building and Neighborhood Services determines whether a building would be considered substantially damaged based on findings from a building inspection. To be considered substantial, the damage must be equal to or exceed 50% of the appraised value of the building. Why is there a difference in how non-residential and residential uses are treated? State law specifically addresses the time limitation for industrial, commercial, or other business nonconformities, but not residential. Our ordinance, therefore, grandfathers in residential uses in the FFO, so they may continue their nonconformity. Will streetscape improvements on 5th Avenue North continue as planned, and will these changes affect the FFO? Streetscape improvements will continue as planned, but not impact the FFO. And I'll turn it over to Vernon. All right.
I want to thank you all for coming, and hopefully you put your name on the list when you came in. When we have future meetings, we'll definitely notify you, and hopefully you have an email address that we can do it. If not, just keep your eyes and ears open, and we'll be discussing this some more. Again, thank you for coming.